3, 2. Right, hi Facebookers. It's Steve Barrett, barely alive. I knew my coughing fit would start as soon as we started recording. We're back with the PR Week podcast. We had a week off last week for July 4th, and I've been away for 3 weeks, so great to be back. Brilliant guest, Rick French, who's chairman and CEO of French West Vaughan. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Looking forward to chatting. And Frank Washkuch, more hirsute than ever. How are you doing, Frank?
Glad to be along. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for sitting in on the podcast
Yes.
while I was away. Well, actually, I did one on the road, didn't I?
Yeah, you
From
did.
Cannes.
But
yeah.
I was going to take credit anyway. So.
Yeah, well, that's what we do around here,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, so we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion on various topical issues. So tell us when to go, Webmaster Perry. Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the world of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the editor-in-chief of PR Week. Going to guide you gently through the next 25, maybe 30 minutes as we do our weekly podcast with our special guest, Rick French, who's chairman and CEO of French West Vaughan. How you doing, Rick?
I'm great. That's the most enthusiastic opening I've ever heard.
Well,
of
there you go.
podcast.
That's what you get with the PR Week podcast. We're all about enthusiasm, aren't we, Frank Washkuch, who's our news director?
Most definitely, and this is a much more enthusiastic response than you usually
Indeed.
get from
Now, this is a little lost to the podcast
Yes.
viewers, but the Facebook livers will be able to see that, Frank, you a few weeks ago said you were incapable of growing a beard.
Yeah.
But that has proven not to be true. Look
well,
at you.
It depends who you ask, doesn't it?
I mean, look at you.
Yeah.
The job offers come holiday season are going to be flooding in, my friend.
I'm going to have to get the red suit pressed.
I think you are.
Ready to go.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's a
for sure.
magnificent item. So yeah, feast on that, Facebookers. We're going to talk to Rick. We'll talk about the World Cup. Still a bit of a sore subject, I'm afraid. My beloved England went out gloriously yesterday. Great effort from the young team. Could have won that game. We should have won that game. First half, we should have been more than one up, but then Croatia came back into it, played well, and were the better team. Eventually, well played to them. But we'll talk about the World Cup. I've been in Russia for a couple of weeks following it, and what does it say about brand Russia as well? It was a really interesting tournament to be a part of. We're going to talk about Buddy Holly. Rick has got some interesting news on that front, so a bit of rock and roll. Papa John's. Goes from bad to worse over there, doesn't it? And why people think it's okay to say certain racist epithets these days still think that's acceptable is amazing. But so the founder has left the company. We'll talk about Martin Sorrell. Wouldn't be a podcast without him. He's made his first acquisition at his new company, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about Brand USA as well. Presidents in Europe making friends, influencing people in the UK as we speak, and so how's that playing out globally? But Rick, let's talk to you first. Your agency, French West Vaughan, based in Raleigh. I hope I said that right.
You said it right.
Yes, that's the HQ, but you have outposts in other parts of the country.
We do.
Tell us a little bit about the work you do, why the historical roots, and how it's developed over the last couple of years.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Appreciate
It's a pleasure.
So the agency was started in '97, so 21 years ago, and I started it. I was running the PR division of a Raleigh-based ad agency, and they saw us as a below-the-line discipline, just contributing extra profit, but not integral to the core of the business. And so I went out. I got a little angel investment backing to start my firm, and 21 years later, we've done all right. I guess we're up to about a $25 million firm with 115 or 20 employees. It's hard to keep count.
How many of those are in Raleigh, and how many are...
About 75 in Raleigh, and the rest are spread between LA, Tampa, and New York.
Okay.
And the firm's largely focused on consumer. We do a lot of great work for brands like Wrangler and Red Bull and Volvo trucks and Melita Coffee, and a lot of well-known iconic consumer brands. But we have public relations, public affairs, full advertising and creative resource, and a large and growing digital and social media team.
Yeah, so that sort of fully integrated background, advertising background, has obviously come in really handy with the way the industry's developed in that time and where it's moved towards everyone doing everything.
Yeah, I think we were one of the first PR firms to actually acquire an ad agency. I bought West and Vaughan back in 2002. They were a well-respected regional ad agency. My firm was a PR firm, put the brands together, and off we went. So
what were you called before?
It was Richard French and Associates.
Okay. And is West and Vaughan still around? Still in the
No,
business?
that was part of their exit strategy to sell, so they stayed in the business for a couple of years, but the brand was strong, and we just kind of kept it.
How much of your business is kind of based around Raleigh and client-wise, and how much of it is national clients?
I would say we're probably 80% national, maybe 20% North Carolina, and probably within that 20%, maybe 10% or less is actually in Raleigh.
Okay. And you know, we've chatted about this in the past. What's the sort of challenges of running a smaller agency in the regions rather than maybe in one of the big urban areas like New York, Chicago, or San Francisco?
Well, you know, I guess you have to decide what small is, because you know, we're one of the 20 largest mid-size independents. But yeah, compared to a holding company-owned agency, we're small. But in our market, we're by far the largest.
Right.
So we actually are seen as the large agency and are
Yeah.
competing against smaller agency that are nimble and you know, trying to differentiate themselves. So we compete up and down the spectrum. We compete against the largest multinational agencies for large blue chip clients, and we occasionally will compete with smaller agencies in our market for more locally based clients.
Was Capstrat based in Raleigh, and they were acquired by
and they were
Ketchum?
acquired by Ketchum.
Yeah.
And that's it's been a interesting evolution for them, to say the least.
So, I mean, you must have had approaches from the holding companies over the years. Are you resolutely independent? What do you see as the sort of long-term future of the company?
Every year for 19 years, I've been approached multiple times by every single holding company, and have decided that we like our independence. We think it's a good place to be. We're a member of IPREX, so we have access to support resources in other countries as needed. And the truth is, we don't need the money. I mean, you know, one of the things that that people often cite as a reason for selling is they need additional resources to grow. I have my own private equity fund and firm, so I invest and buy agencies. I'm in negotiations to acquire one right now. We'll kind of see how that goes. We have a number of divisions and other things that we're involved with, so we don't need the capital to grow. You know, we think with our 120 or so people that we have enough brain power to and creative ideas to compete with anyone, and we're fine with remaining independent and steadfastly so. Now, you know, at some point, you know, there may come a time where I decide for my own personal exit strategy that I want to do something different. Obviously, I own you know, film production companies and baseball teams and other things. And you know, my point of view may change, but I don't see that happening anytime
So
soon.
now you're happy and you're enjoying it, and it's going well, because
Yeah.
I think you've grown quite a lot in the last 5 years.
Yeah, we have.
By those numbers, you've almost doubled, haven't you?
Close to that, close to doubling, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not far
So
off.
you said you owned a baseball team.
Yeah.
I see you have a prop there. Tell us, again, better for the
do.
Facebook Live
Absolutely.
viewers than the podcast listeners, but it's a shirt with...
It is a Jackie Robinson Daytona Tortugas shirt. So I'm the co-owner of the Daytona Tortugas. We're the Advanced Day affiliate of the Cincinnati Reds. We play in the Florida State League. And as importantly, we play in Jackie Robinson Ballpark, which is where he broke the color barrier. And when he was playing for Montreal in the Dodgers organization, and no other city would allow him to play, he came to Daytona, and the city officials did. And we still play in the same ballpark, obviously
story.
modernized. So this shirt, the thing about it is that when every other major and minor league team on Jackie Robinson Day wears number 42, we actually wear number 9, because that's the number that he wore that day when he broke the color barrier.
And what year was that, for my ignorance?
I
believe it was 47.
I was going to say 1947, I think is
I
right.
think it was 47.
Yeah. And we have a living history museum of of famous color barrier breakers around our stadium, and we're kind of a national pilgrimage site. One of those places that people say they have to go because it was a historic ballpark. It's beautiful. It sits on an island, surrounded on water by three sides and a marina and palm trees, and it's a beautiful place to take in a
Fantastic.
baseball
So
game.
if anyone's ever in Daytona,
Please
go
have-
check it out.
So-
shoot me a note and I'll hook you up.
So how did you get into owning a minor league team?
So I owned one of the Dodgers minor league teams. I bid for an expansion franchise in the South Atlantic League back in 2001, a long time ago, and brought a team to North Carolina to the coast. But unfortunately, the city officials there kind of reneged on a commitment to build us a new ballpark after we brought the team there on a handshake agreement. And we were forced to play in a college stadium for a couple years. And the problem with that is in North Carolina, you can't sell beer in a college ballpark. 40% of your revenue in minor league baseball comes from concession sales, and a big percentage of that is beer. So you can't make any money and you're going to lose a lot of money if you can't sell beer at a ballpark. So I put the team up for sale when we couldn't get a new stadium built, and the new owner did an Art Modell and literally moved the team the next day to Georgia after we realized that he was in one conversation with the city about a ballpark that they weren't prepared to see their commitment through, and he moved it. So I looked at opportunities over the years. I was part of the group that was trying to buy the Montreal Expos and move it to Washington, D.C. And when the bidding got, I thought, just out of what I felt comfortable in, I dropped out of that particular group and just kept an eye open for opportunities. And I thought, if you're going to own a baseball team, owning it in Daytona Beach isn't the worst place to go. I'm going to fly there tomorrow for our big Shelbowski promotion. We've got we're honoring the Big Lebowski 20-year anniversary on Saturday. ESPN is bringing its set down, and we're giving out the Dude bobbleheads, and we're doing a lawn bowling tournaments while people drink White Russians. It's going to be.
It sounds like a classy day out. I want to go. I want to be at this.
It's not a bad Saturday.
It sounds far out.
And the thing is that our stadium's really just quarter mile or so off the beach. So if you get to go down to Daytona Beach and spend it on the beach during the day and go to baseball games at night. So to me, that was what enticed me to buy the team.
And where does the name Tortugas come from?
We created it. I mean, obviously, the turtle population is important to the coast of Florida. And so we came up with that name. We used to be the Daytona Cubs when the Cubs were our minor league affiliate. But the year that we bought the team, we changed the team name to the Tortugas so that we weren't tied to the major league club in case affiliations do change over time.
Sure. So. Yeah, we got to get one of those Lebowski bobbleheads.
I will send a couple of them up here.
Thank you. That would be lovely. Yeah, so it's fascinating stuff. That whole concept of franchises and sports is slightly foreign to me, but where you just buy up a franchise and take it to another city is very common in the States, but in the UK, the sports are much more tied into the local community, and they've been there for centuries, and they'll always stay there. I think there's been one time when a franchise kind of moved away, so that's a very different concept, isn't it?
It is different here. It's a capitalist society, so people figure if they get a new stadium and a better market, it's like a relationship. You sometimes are trading up.
Yeah, I mean, in England, when it happened within the soccer, Wimbledon was taken over, and they moved the club to a place called Milton Keynes, changed the name of the club to the Milton Keynes Dons, and Wimbledon went back to playing on a local park. And last year, they got right back into the league after 10 years and actually overtook the Milton Keynes Dons and went above them. That was a great day of celebration for them, for their local community, etc. So yeah, interesting stuff. Good to find out more about what you're doing, Rick. I mean, sounds like some exciting stuff, and we'll talk about your Buddy Holly activation in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the World Cup. As I said, I've been out in Russia for 2 weeks following England, but also just generally following the impact of the World Cup There was a lot of naysayers about Russia saying it was going to be, a really terrible tournament, especially from the English point of view. There were hardly any England fans there. They'd been put off by the scare stories about violence and what have you. But actually it was fantastic. It was really well organised, well run. Everyone was very friendly, and I think, Russia's come out of it rather well. So I don't know, from your point of view, Frank, looking from afar, if you like, the World Cup first, what's your perception been? We've done some pieces about how brands didn't get quite as involved for those reasons as before. And then what does it say about Brand Russia as well?
Well, I think it's come off well. It's looked like a well-run tournament. It's had a lot of upsets. It's got a lot of interest. We should say that TV ratings in the U.S. are down, I think, between a quarter and a third.
Over the Brazil?
Over the Brazil games, which of course is due to there's no U.S. team.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the more fair weather fans, or the fans that just follow the U.S. team, are not as interested this year. In some ways, I think it's kind of interesting that there's not a breakout brand. Maybe it means that there's not a crazy incident that happened, like Luis Suarez biting somebody like last time, and then Snickers hopped on it. I think that was a memorable thing. That was a memorable thing from 4 years ago.
It certainly was for the guy he bit, but yeah. He has a bit of a history in that respect as Suarez, but anyway. What about the competition as a whole?
I think the games have been terrific for the most part. I mean, we mentioned Luis Suarez. I mean, the game in which Uruguay knocked out Portugal was a terrific game. And there have been a number of other, just down to the wire games that have gone into extra time. I mean, the competition's been great. Yeah,
it has been interesting, and of course, a lot of the big names went out. Lionel Messi. You mentioned Suarez, Cristiano Ronaldo.
And a lot of teams in the Americas went out.
Yeah,
Uruguay was the last one left.
That's right. The last four were all European. That often happens that when the tournament's in Europe, it favours the European teams because of the climate, and then when it's in America, Latin America, it's hotter. Although last time Germany won, but it was good. Well, it was good from our point of view to see Germany, Argentina, and Brazil exiting, because it meant England had this once-in-a-lifetime run through where they had played relatively easy opposition, and that will never happen again, believe me. Rick, does the World Cup make much of an imprint on your life, or on the brands that you work with, or what's the perception from Raleigh?
Now, I think I did the interview with you guys prior to this about what I kind of expected with the World Cup, and thought that the ratings would be down. As Frank said, they're down fairly significantly. So are ad dollars, which means that a lot of the advertisers that have traditionally put dollars behind the games sat it out or scaled back that spend this year. So, it has had an interesting impact. I think if you also looked around at grassroots activations, the bars that typically have just been packed for games, you don't see the same excitement without the U.S. But that's been a general trend in sports. If you look at it,
that's
Super
true.
Bowl ratings this year were the lowest in a decade, even though it was a fantastic game. In general, live sports viewership has fallen off a little bit, and that used to be the one very safe bet if you were an advertiser. All that being said, it's been a terrific tournament. I've been glued to it. I've watched a lot of those games. I agree. I mean, almost every Croatia game, going to extra time and deep into it has been exciting, and it's been a great tournament. And Russia, as a host city, I think has come off better than it did hosting the Winter Olympics in Sochi. For sure, there were a lot of concerns and complaints that haven't really been addressed. But it's also, when they hosted in Sochi, I think there was a lot of the stadiums were just being built. Facilities were coming down to the wire in terms of construction. Those were in place this time, so you were there, and there's.
Well, they didn't have any snow in Sochi at one point, did they? They had to manufacture.
That
was a bit of a problem.
That was a real problem for them.
Sochi is warm, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is why it was an interesting decision to award it to them for a Winter Olympics in the first place. But I think they've come across well. Putin has done a good job of staying in the background and not overshadowing the games, which I think was smart politically on his part. And I think Russia, and Russia also made a good run itself.
That
in the
helped
tournament.
a lot.
That helped them, and I don't know if it changed anybody in the U.S.'s feelings about Russia, but from a world stage standpoint, they've acquitted themselves pretty well.
Yeah, it's I think the thing with an Olympics, it's in one city, isn't it? Whereas this was in about 12 cities, so you got to mostly in the western part, because Russia's a vast country and there's a whole eastern part that you're probably not going to want to visit that much. But I was in 2 cities which were closed up until 1991. You know,
Wow.
Samara and Nizhny Novgorod. So it's really interesting to go and visit a place like that where they're not really used to having tourists or visitors, and you know the people were like, do you like our city? You know, and there's lots of sort of misperceptions from both sides about us and about them, and you know when it comes down to it, we're all people, and actually it was great. You know, it was they were welcoming, they were glad to be there. We were enjoying, you know, visiting all these places. The Russians opened up this fan ID system, so you didn't need a visa. That made it a lot easier. They laid on free transport between cities, free transport to stadiums, all sorts of little touches where there were volunteers everywhere who were really helpful and friendly. So, you know, I've seen people like Gary Kasparov sort of saying, you know, you're being drawn in by this propaganda, and you know this isn't the real Russia, etc., etc. I'm sure there's an element of truth in that, but at the end of the day, it's been a fantastic event for everyone. It's great that Russia went deep, and you know it is fascinating to go and visit all these beautiful places. Actually, it's some incredible cities, and that you would never probably go unless you had that, you know, excuse of the World Cup to do it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they build on that. And whether it's just a temporary blip or whether they... And some of the stadiums, it was touch and go. Samara, I was there on Saturday for the England-Sweden game. We were at the top, level 5, and you know, you could see it was a bit of duct tape, and it had only just been finished. So, but no, in general, it's been a terrific tournament. And yeah, I think the TV view ratings are down. Not the greatest of timings for live games for US viewers, like sort of during the day. Whereas Brazil, I think, was much more
right. And it's the same way in the Olympics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's when there's a significant time zone change, viewership falls off.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, it was well, personally a fantastic trip. Gutted that England didn't make it to the final, but they did brilliantly. Well, there's another sort of visitor in Europe at the moment, President Trump. He's been there for a NATO summit, and he's now heading to the UK. He's going to have a summit with President Putin in Helsinki. Interesting what you said about Putin, because the opening game he was there and he made a speech before the game, and you're thinking, if you're a Russian player and he's just made that speech, you're like, no pressure, you know. They went on and won 5-0, so maybe that was... But you're right, he did then, and at the time I thought, wow, I've never seen this. But then he did sort of step back into the background, and I think that was good.
Well, he's getting ready apparently to annex Germany, isn't he? The German Republic of Russia?
Well, yeah, well, we'll see. But certainly the one thing you notice there is monuments to the Great War, as they call it, which was 41 to 45 for them. Everywhere, that is a massive thing. There's eternal flames in every city and great memorials. You forget how many millions of Russians died in that. But what's your view on... Frank first, the president.
Oh, thank you.
He's certainly been stirring things up, but you know, in his inimitable fashion, he seems to be. I mean, is he getting the NATO members to spend a bigger percentage of their GDP?
It depends who you believe, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of things with the president are like this, and that he says one thing and then somebody else says the opposite, and it depends who you're getting your information from. You know, so this morning he held an impromptu press conference in which he said that. I think he said numbers were skyrocketing in terms of how much other NATO members were spending on defense as part of NATO. And then the French president, who I will butcher his name.
Macron.
Well, it's the first name that gives me trouble.
Oh, okay.
Then
Macron.
basically said, no, this is exactly what we agreed to before. So yeah, I guess it depends who you believe, as usual.
Yeah, I think he did his press conference, but he'd already missed 2 meetings and kept everyone waiting for half an hour. And you know, there was an emergency session after his press conference, etc., etc. What do you think, Rick? Is this?
Well, I
is
think
this just the art of great deal making?
Here's what I'd say. If you look at today's Wall Street Journal, there's a great picture on the front where all of the world leaders are looking in one direction and Trump's looking
Going his own way.
I think that sums it up.
That was great.
It was reminiscent of when he was looking at the eclipse, wasn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But he's the only person on Earth who could look directly at the eclipse and not
Right.
need glasses,
Well, that's
according
because
to him.
he's got outstanding eyes.
Right.
He's got the most outstanding eyes, and he's struck a great deal with it. Yeah. He's going to the UK, and there's supposed to be this blimp that's going to be flying
Yes.
in the sky, sort of a baby Trump blimp.
Yeah, well, I jokingly, before we got started here, if you've ever seen Roger Waters do his one of his concerts,
The Wall, yeah.
he's got a Trump pig blimp that he flies out there, and he's not shy about his feelings about the president. And apparently, there's going to be other protests that are planned in the streets. But I think that's partly because of what's happening with Brexit. The prime minister's situation, the cabinet situation.
It's falling apart. Yeah.
It's falling apart. But I think you have to ask yourself, how much of this is driven by the uncertainty here in the U.S. and the divisiveness, and it just, rather than the U.S. leading by example and being cohesive in its policies, that kept a lot of the other countries in line. I think that what you've got now is a situation where the U.S. looks in disarray, and so everybody else is following.
I think there's certainly some of the same things that drove the election of President Trump were behind the vote in favor of Brexit.
Yeah.
People who lived in communities which they felt had been abandoned, and old industries died and nothing was put in place. That was definitely a drive, and they felt, well, we can't do any worse than we're doing now, so let's try something different, whatever it is.
Yeah. There was a great story this morning, and unfortunately I'm forgetting the sourcing of this, but there was a great story this morning about how a lot of the fake news accounts on social media were actually posting real accurate news stories for months beforehand so that people locally would build up trust in them, and then suddenly turned in the months before the election, which showed that it was actually a very sophisticated operation in those months.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting story.
Excuse me. Be interesting to see the Putin summit. He apparently wants to meet alone with Vladimir Putin. So
Putin will show Trump the pictures that he has. And it'll be
just to make sure, just to keep him on message. Yeah. Well, we tried to be non-partisan on the PR Week podcast.
I truly am non-partisan.
We're
calling it as I see it.
But it's difficult. It's difficult not to make observations, isn't it? But yeah, interesting stuff for sure. Tell us about Buddy Holly. Why? How are you getting involved with that?
Buddy Holly,
great singer.
He is
wearing a pair of his glasses
he
as we
was,
speak.
as a matter of fact, and Buddy Holly was huge in the UK. He might have been more popular in the UK than he was in the US. So my third full-time job, in addition to running
I was going to say, you're a busy guy.
and the baseball team, is I have a film production company and just completed 2 major motion pictures, and now am on to doing a news story that's gotten a lot of publicity this week, really around the globe. It's been kind of crazy. It's not a biopic on Buddy Holly. That was done 40 years ago with the Buddy Holly story and Gary Busey.
That's right. It was Gary Busey.
Gary Busey. Wow.
Gary
Busey.
Gary Busey.
That's something to think about.
He had a Best Academy Award nomination.
Did he really?
For Best Actor. He didn't win it, but
that's years before Point Break.
Yeah, it won the Best Musical Score.
Wow.
But we're doing. So I have the privilege of. I'm pretty deeply involved in the music industry. I've been on the Board of Trustees of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for 13 years, and I'm on the Buddy Holly Education Foundation board. And I was having brunch at South by Southwest and talking with another board member about the idea that I had of telling Buddy's story through a different lens. And it really is based around the idea that in the late 50s, you had racial segregation in this country. You couldn't sit in the same lunch counter, but in many cases, you go into a concert hall and there would be a black side and a white side. But what was interesting is that Buddy, prior to the Winter Dance Party, which took him to Clear Lake, Iowa, where he got on that plane and crashed and died, there was a tour called The Biggest Show of Stars that brought together, it was the first racially integrated tour of black, white, and brown, all in the same bill.
Little Richard.
Yeah. One of my friends, Clarence Collins of Little Anthony and the Imperials, was on that tour, and we were having dinner together in Las Vegas in December, and he was telling me stories about he and Buddy on that tour. And I got to South by, I kept thinking about the idea for this movie, and said, why don't we tell their two parallel stories of how their lives converge and the unlikely friendship that they form in New York City during rehearsals for the Greatest Show of Stars tour. And so, and then we would show them going in their different directions, because the promoter at that time was unsure who he could send where. He could send white artists to the Midwest, but he couldn't send black artists certain places. So what happened is we started down this path, and I titled the film Clear Lake, and went to Maria Elena Holly, who I know well because I sit on her board, and asked her, can I make this movie? And then I went to BMG that holds the rights to the catalog and asked if we could do it, and they said not only can we do it, but we'll invest with you in doing it.
Cool.
And now this thing has just exploded. So we announced the project called Clear Lake Monday in an exclusive in Variety. And from there, the story has been picked up. I've done interviews in China, Italy, France, the UK, Canada, Latin America, and then all around the U.S. And the interest in this movie has just absolutely exploded. So I've had famous musicians calling and texting me saying, hey, I'd love to be the musical director. I'd love to be involved. I have a love for Buddy Holly. Because really, without Buddy Holly, I'd argue there's no rock and roll. He really created such a unique sound that to this day, bands like the Beatles and Eric Clapton, I could show you this, something from Pete Townsend on my phone that was shot yesterday, that where he talks about, he wrote a handwritten note about how much he loves Buddy Holly and his influence. And
so when's the film going to be out?
So we're going to start production in February, which is the 60th anniversary of the plane crash. We're going to start it in Clear Lake, so we're going to reverse this thing. And we're also going to do a concert in Clear Lake that I'll let your listeners in on. We haven't announced it publicly, but Don McLean is going to headline, because he obviously American Pie is about the death of Buddy. So he's going to headline along with some other very famous artists to celebrate the 60th anniversary. We're going to take some shots there. We're going to get some shots in Clear Lake, and then we'll go down the production path. So our
Do you
goal
have a
would
lead
be,
actor yet, or is that TBD?
No, but we're in negotiations with a pretty big name. We'll see where that goes. I would expect that we will have the movie shot next year and release it probably late in 2020
yeah.
or early in 2021, at a place, whether we went to Sundance or went to South by Southwest to premiere it before we sold it off to a distributor.
It's a long process, isn't it, making films? It's
Making film. I've been working on one for 9 years that is finally going to start shooting here shortly. But then I had two that went, the True Don Quixote and the Fox Hunter, that got done in a year and a half. So it's still a long process, but it depends on the will, the financing, whether you have distributors and so on. When I created my own film production company with a director, screenwriter friend of mine, pre-productions, we just said the reason we're creating our own is so we don't have to rely on other people to get this stuff done, to get the script written and in development. So that should help us with our projects kind of accelerate and move them along much
Sounds
quicker
good.
than
We're looking
normal.
forward to seeing that. It's a great project.
It'll be a fun movie.
Love the music, and you're right. I mean, Motown sort of was another big bring it together of black and white kids,
It was,
wasn't it?
yeah,
And
for
it's-
sure.
but you're right. People used to have to stay in different hotels and all sorts of things. So it's not that long ago either. It's
No,
crazy.
it's not.
really.
I grew up in Detroit, so the Motown influence it runs through my blood, but that's absolutely true.
Very quickly, Frank, because we're running over a little bit. Papa John's, to the point that still a lot of work to be done on attitudes to race. He's everyone knows about it, but tell us. What
Yeah,
happened.
sadly, another one of these "You Can't Believe It Happens" in 2018 stories, in which John Schnatter, who is the kind of public face of Papa John's, the former CEO and the chairman, the chairman until yesterday, but the founder of the company, used very inappropriate language on a call with their marketing agency back in May. The contents of that call just became public this week. He acknowledged that the reports were accurate, apologized for it, and Laundry Service, the marketing firm that he was on the phone with, ironically about preventing corporate crises from happening, resigned their work for the pizza chain yesterday, and Olson Engage, the PR AOR since earlier this year, resigned their work with Papa John's just yesterday.
Yeah, not a great story, and the brand is going to hurt a lot because of that. Very quickly, Rick, I mean, what the issue for an agency there is, when do you resign an account, I suppose? What sort of, how do you monitor that? Is it a black and white?
Well, in a situation like that, you resign it as quickly as you can say, I quit.
Yeah.
I think that, what's interesting with him is that I've known him for a long time. He's been around the NFL circles where we do a lot of work forever. And I've seen him interact with players of all races, and never would have expected that kind of language out of him, just knowing that he's got a lot of friends in the league. But as to that kind of situation, you've got to look at the rest of your client base. If you're defending someone who used that kind of inflammatory language and racist language, then it's an easy decision. It may not be easy when it comes to your pocketbook and the fact that you got people assigned to those accounts that you're employing. But, we tell our clients all the time that the easiest answer is just do the right thing, right? That's the quickest way out of a crisis. And so if you're an agency, you've got to stand by that as well. You do the right thing, you resign it, you move on. You don't defend the behavior, and there's other clients out there. There's plenty of work for everybody, and if I had been faced with that situation, I would have done exactly what those two firms did. Does
it matter that he's no longer with the company, that he's resigned as chairman and he's no longer CEO?
I don't think so. He was the founder. He was the face of the company. If he had been separated from the company for a period of time, that might have been different, but he wasn't.
Right.
And he was front and center during the NFL protest issue. He made some statements that didn't turn out to be true about them backing away from the NFL, and they really didn't. Not really. They changed their marketing mix a little bit, but no, I don't think at this point that it would have influenced my decision.
Okay.
Shouldn't they have resigned when he said it, rather than waiting for it to come out in public?
So Olson says they weren't on the call.
No, but it was Laundry Service, I was thinking.
Right. I would argue yes, that Laundry Service should have resigned it 2 months ago when they were on the call, and I mean, it should have been set off bells and whistles that something clearly wasn't right here. And I mean, you know how it is in any workplace. What he said on the call would have spread from one employee to another very quickly, and other people at the agency would have known, you would think, that week.
Yeah.
I might argue this, though. We defend difficult clients, controversial clients, and issues all the time. In their situation, had they heard that on the call, and again, what level the person was on that call, right? If it would be different if it was the CEO versus an account executive. But I might have looked at that and said, look, let's intervene and have some counseling and try to have a positive influence so that kind of language and that kind of behavior isn't exhibited. And if you found that continued, then it's different. I don't know that at that point it's absolutely black and white, but when it goes public, you've got your reputation tied to the behavior of others, and so then it becomes a very easy decision.
Right.
Finally, Frank, Martin Sorrell, he has made his first acquisition, Media Monks, and he beat off some strong competition to get that, didn't he?
His former holding company, from beat WPP to the punch on this major acquisition.
Well, that went down well when they're about to write him a $20 million check, or pounds.
Which they might not now, according to them.
Well, there's no non-competes. I mean, I don't know. Where do they stand legally on that?
Really? But this is interesting because he seems to be taking it to his former holding company. And very quickly, too. It's less than 90 days since he resigned as the CEO of WPP. Media Monks is an Amsterdam-based digital shop. You can see their name a lot on the names for Cannes-nominated, Lion-winning agencies. Really interesting shop that other suitors were out there looking at. So yeah, I mean, I guess it just raises the question of what's next, right?
Yeah, well, it's how he started with WPP, wasn't it? Wire and plastic products. Interesting stuff. All right, we've run out of time. Rick, it was great to chat. Really
Thanks for having
interesting.
me. A lot of fun.
And yes, thanks for sparing the time, given the amount of things on your plate at the moment. And enjoy the weekend. The Big Shabowski, is it?
Big Shalbowski.
Yeah, I might hop on a plane, come down myself. Don't forget the Diversity Distinction in PR Awards. The final deadline for that is July the 18th, Frank? Is it? That's the final deadline?
I believe it's the 17th, but...
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, it was the 18th.
Anyway, you should get your entries in as soon as
it was in the
possible.
breakfast briefing. It's the 18th this morning, mate. We've got our big conference in Chicago in October the 18th. Very excited about that. Great lineup of speakers already. So do mark that in your calendar. And I hope you enjoyed the Power List. Let us know what you thought of our selections. Always sparks a big debate. And we're going to launch our PR Week Awards next week for 2018-19. That's our 20th. So Rick, I'm sure you'll be looking out for that. I know how much you love a PR Week Awards entry.
I absolutely would. It comes around quickly, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
It's already award season.
All right, but that's all we got time for. We'll see you next time on the PR Week.